move on to the planner's report. There wasn't much anything new in it, other than the lighting meeting which occurred earlier this week. Does anybody have any questions for Michael about the planner's report?
And I think I included a link to like the presentation in there, so if people are curious.
You did. You did.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm gonna look at it later for sure. I hadn't had a chance yet, but yeah, it's great to see.
And I'll get like follow-up documents from CHA, the engineering firm that did that, and I'll post those in the same location.
Okay, fantastic. Then let's move to accept the planner's report as submitted. And have a motion on that.
Motion to accept the planner's report.
Okay. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, so that's unanimous. Let's move forward. And Jeff, you have the stage and the screen. Mine is a spotlight.
Great. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me again. I'm Jeff Bagg. I'm a senior planner with BSC Group. I've been with this committee for a little bit. I do apologize for not being able to get any materials in advance. I think last time I had hoped to have more robust sort of draft of the report, but I don't have that tonight. But I do have a couple slides I'd like to go through to show the committee where we are at with the revised concept plans. And then what I have put together, because we're even with our project itself, we're running a couple parallel paths. We've been working on the concept plans, and we have some revisions to show you, which are they're actually pretty straightforward. And I wanted to just give you guys a preview of kind of some precedent examples, some sort of design considerations that we're starting to look at based on your feedback, and we're going to embed those into the report. And then simultaneous to all this, we've been starting the permitting analysis that is part of our scope for the range of permits that are going to be required for what we're trying to size up is this concept A, which the committee seemed to agree on in terms of a conceptual plan. So we're going to do some permitting analysis with that, and we are starting that, and that took a lot of the time in this intervening month. And then after we go through that, I'm hoping with Michael's guidance that we can have a discussion of going to the select board with some information about this project. And so
our plan, Jeff, I'm sorry to interrupt. Our plan, Michael and I talked earlier today. Our plan is to, finalize our comments tonight, have those comments or in whatever feedback incorporated to this final revision, and then be able to present to the select board in April. So if you can hold your comments until the end of Jeff's presentation, that would be helpful. And then, we can all weigh in at the end of the presentation. And again, the goal is to have our comments be final tonight so that Jeff has his marching orders or some direction from us that allows him to put together the final report for the selectmen.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you for that. So I don't need to take a long time tonight because we've seen a lot of this. This committee in particular has seen all of this before. But this presentation, I can email the PDF after the meeting. What we did, so this should be showing concept A, which has pretty much stayed the same in terms of the layout, where the Holy Angels Church is remaining and activated with some kind of use. And then we have that first mixed use building along the top there along Milford Street, and then kind of coming down Grove Street with a second mixed use building. What we were able to do since the last meeting is we squeezed out a few more parking spaces, which was kind of a discussion piece last time. On the right side, I just put it in blue. The previous plan that we talked about last month had 32 spaces, and with the revised plan, we were able to get up to 36 in total. And what we kind of did was, and this stayed the same, as you would go down Grove Street, enter at the bottom of the page, and then be able to enter that parking area, and then traverse up, and then there would be an exit only at the middle of the parking lot that would enter you back into the roundabout. So we were able to squeeze a couple parking spaces in there. We added some areas for stormwater. So it's labeled stormwater management areas. And so those are intended to be like bioswale type stormwater that would cleanse sheet flow coming off the parking lots. We added back in with some color coding some of the resource area setbacks. So we had a lot more call outs on the right, and we've kind of condensed some of them so we could create this legend. And so in the legend, you can see the 200-foot riverfront, 100-foot buffer from wetlands and streams, and then the FEMA floodplain. And so we've carried that through all the drawings because that actually will become pretty critical when we're discussing the permitting analysis. So the building configurations really didn't change in this one, but we were able to create a couple more parking spaces. And then one thing I would call out, I have been trying to follow along with a lot of the town's other discussions that are going on, which are great and fantastic and very interesting to follow. Some of the discussions about the church building itself, just below it, in kind of that beige color, there's just a square, but it's kind of like a plaza. This could be a space that if it were, maintained and could get incorporated into plans, it would be an outdoor space. And then just knowing that there could be discussions about the church itself, things such as an elevator or future access, I think there's enough wiggle room around the back. We're showing the ramp in brown. We're showing a conceptual option for the ramp to come all the way down to the parking lot, but that area could be where an elevator might be located. I think there's always an option for it to go on the other side of the church, but it's more complex. There's some complexities over there. It's just steeper terrain and it's harder to get to if you were a wheelchair user and that kind of thing. So we're showing the ADA sidewalk to that side of the building. So that's concept A. And this was the one that, based on our discussion last time, this is kind of identified as like a preferred option. And this is the one that we would probably carry forward with permitting analysis and sort of an order of magnitude cost estimate. And then again, just to kind of go along with some of the discussions I've been listening to, is the church building itself it's not within our scope to come up with an order of magnitude cost because it's very complicated and there's a whole set of professionals that will look at that. What we will provide is a order of magnitude cost for new construction because those numbers are a little easier to ascertain. So mixed use building and then some of the parking improvements. And so our cost estimate will focus on the new development and then it'll have to be kind of complemented with work from the town on the church because that's a little outside of our area of expertise to come up with numbers for. Concept B is the concept where hypothetically the church is removed and the Thompson blocks removed, and in terms of rough proportionality, you could put a 9,000 square foot building there, and that's a footprint. All the buildings that we're looking at are right now for 2 stories. The zoning does allow up to 3, but I think for conceptual purposes we're talking 2 stories, and that really hasn't changed. This concept hasn't really changed much. We did not squeeze out the parking spaces in this one, but we did add the stormwater management. And then just here, I would highlight that on the right are the callouts. So the callout that's underneath the community center label, it's the proposed disturbed area. If you look closely, there's a yellow outline. And what we're trying to do is keep track of this area that's within the riverfront. There's an amount of square feet that can be disturbed compared to what's existing. And so, with this idea, we're within the existing disturbed area calculation, and we're trying to make sure we follow that all the way through all the concepts to make sure that in terms of that permitting analysis that the developer, whomever that would be in the future, would be able to look at that and know that they can produce this kind of development scenario within that limit. So this one hasn't changed much, but it's part of the packet. And then similarly, concept C, we haven't not done much else with it. I think it kind of stands on its own. We did have the stormwater features. I think the committee had expressed some concerns with sort of the largeness of that parking lot. And I think, we heard that there's a tree line shown on Grove Street, but I think this plan does show where if for some reason this building wasn't able to be built on Grove Street, it could be converted or changed to parking. And we just wanted to kind of keep this plan in the mix because that might be something that happens in the future. And this one considers the Thompson block as a removed structure and renovated as new, just constructed as new. And this one has the total of 31 parking spaces, kind of just for the municipal side, and then 8 for the building. And then the last one where we are conceptualizing is sort of just expanding the town-owned parking lot. There's a little bit going on in this drawing, but the parking area that's existing gets reduced a little bit to 9 spaces. So I think we talked about this last time. The Mass DOT project by itself eliminates 3 parking spaces. And then we have to reduce that as we talk about expanding off of that parking lot to the south. It's a net gain. You would add 16 additional parking spaces and you would total 25. Whereas like today, in terms of paved, improved parking surfaces, there's 14 spaces. So there's an increase of 11 spaces. And we're still working on this one. I had hoped to get an updated version of this to Michael, but the landscape architect on this couldn't finish it today. But one discrepancy that we uncovered late was in the expanded parking lot. You can see the entrance and exit demarked by the 2 arrows. What we're realizing is that that entrance actually has to shift up slightly. And what it'll do is it'll change the configuration of this parking lot. We still think that we're conceptualizing around 16 spaces, but the entrance is going to shift up and it's going to create a row of parking spaces along the bottom of the drawing. And so we just didn't have enough time to kind of get that updated for this meeting tonight. But I did want to mention it. And throughout this, we're conceptualizing crossing over the parking lot with a pedestrian walkway. And I think what we're going to do is delineate how the sidewalks closer to Grove Street are going to be paved, or they'll be either blacktop or concrete. And then once you get over to the right side of the page, where we're closer to the resource area, it'll turn to a different substrate. So it'll probably be gravel of some sort. And I have a couple examples of what we're envisioning that could look like, and I'll get to that in a second. But I did want to note that this drawing will change a little bit between now and potentially a discussion with the select board. But it was a bit of a work in progress this week, and so I couldn't get the revised plan to you guys. So in total, sorry, one more thing. So, and it's kind of a big deal. So we're also showing this potential future parking area that could be expanded off to the north and go behind the Thompson block. This part is really, we're not going to be able to really engineer or kind of really show how this would actually happen. But what we really want to do was to show you needed a couple of parking spaces. You could build off of this parking lot and go behind the Thompson block in the future. We just wanted to kind of show that this whole arrangement wouldn't ultimately preclude access to the back. And one other note here is if you're traveling up Grove Street and about to enter the roundabout, there is still a curb cut that Mass DOT will construct that will provide access to the existing. There's a small parking lot next to the Thompson block that's currently used, and that gets preserved. And so nothing about the Mass DOT project by itself would eliminate that. So the owners of that building will, once the Mass DOT project is done, they'll still be able to drive in and out of there, and they'll have the 3 or 4 parking spaces that they currently have. So none of the projects eliminate that, but we were trying to just show that there could be a scenario where additional parking is built behind that building if that were ever to come to fruition. So we just wanted to show that it wasn't precluded. And then from here, I'm just going to shift to kind of a quick summary of where we're going with the report. It's a little blurry because I was kind of pulling some of it out just to put it in this format. But what we're envisioning is having a section that talks about design considerations. We heard a lot the first couple meetings about you know, how important this area is. It's got all the historic buildings. It's highly visible. So, you know, the report is going to really identify that the the way that this gets developed is going to be critical. So the building architecture, the patterns, you know, where the buildings are potentially located, and then how they interact with the surrounding neighborhood. So we're finding some really good examples of other municipalities who have illustrated guidelines. And so we're going to pair them with the written guidelines that Upton has and just kind of merge these together to kind of give the basis for either if the town ever wanted to go out to RFP again, you know, these materials could be incorporated or offered to a developer to point them in the right direction. So the image on the right is just kind of a depiction of a mixed use building. And I'm really a fan of trying to incorporate some of these graphics because our project will not we will not be providing a 3D rendering of these mixed use buildings because I think we all talked that we don't want to go there yet. We're not ready. We're not funded for drawing architectural drawings, and people's imagination can get carried away pretty quick. But we do want to start to give these examples, and so this image will be a little crisper in the final version, but it's a good one that shows how a mixed-use building is set back a little bit to offer, you know, active space out front. I'm trying to pull some examples of something that helps articulate what a mixed-use building is at 2 stories. And so many of the examples I'm finding are 3 stories and higher. So I did like this image that shows a 2-story mixed-use building. It just starts to identify some of the features. And so I'm going to keep trying to find some images that really help anchor people as to what we're talking about when we talk about a mixed-use building. And then on the right, you know, this one talks about how the orientation to the street is really important, how access is going to be important, and things like that. And then here, this is the Cape Cod Commission. Cape Cod has actually a pretty good wealth of information. Cape Cod has some similarities to Central Mass as well as Western Mass in terms of the scale of buildings and kind of their historic downtowns. They have a lot of similarities. And so this is one of their mixed use model bylaws. And they had a couple of these images that I wanted to incorporate because I think it starts to help get people oriented with generally where this might end up. So the top picture is in Hyannis and it's 10 units. And it's on a pretty small parcel and it's about 2.5 stories. And then the bottom picture is in Providence and it's 8 units. And it's actually 2 buildings. So we're going to do a little deeper dive as to what these projects look like, but we think that they're starting to show some pretty good examples. A lot of what else is out there for mixed use buildings starts to get to 4 stories really quick. So I'm shying away from those kind of images. And then the last one for the mixed use building, again, is kind of this active ground floor narrative that I think we all talked about embracing, and how the building really has to be built that way. But the active uses on the first floor allows for residential or potentially even offices on the second floor. And so we want to continue to kind of show this. And then I'm just trying to kind of draw the comparison of the actual site plan that we're preparing, the concepts, and how these two correlate to each other. So we're going to have some graphic illustrations within the report to kind of help people get to what is a mixed use building. And then two more design considerations, and then I'm done for discussion. But some parking lot design considerations. I think I showed the image on the right before, but this is to me is a really good graphic for the Grove Street parking lot because it has a lot of similarities in terms of its location next to the road. I'm pairing it with an image of Grove Street to the left. I will get a better picture next time we're out there that's really sort of on the same plane, so you could really kind of compare and contrast these two. And then because of my familiarity with East Hampton, this is a project that on the left is a project in East Hampton that they did a green infrastructure master plan. And so they had this kind of conceptual renovation of a town-owned parking lot where the bioswale was inserted in the middle, while preserving all the existing parking spaces, just as a way to green the space and to better handle stormwater. And so this image will be a little crisper, but it does show that this is kind of common for municipal parking lots to kind of bring in these components. And I'm just kind of pairing it with, how our graphic will look with the municipal parking lot being potentially expanded in the bioswale there. And then finally, this concept of the trail running, alongside Center Brook and kind of coming back out on Grove Street. Given that it's close to the resource area, I think imagining that it would be gravel, this compacted gravel surface, is actually more and more common in terms of being low impact to resource areas, but also providing ADA accessibility. Some of what we'll look at is different levels of ADA. There's some Forest Service standards, which so like the state's park grant program will fund projects that meet the Forest Service, which allows for a little bit steeper terrain. But there's also this Mass Audubon guide, which I actually found to be really helpful in terms of a place to refer the types of trail that you might envision along the stream. And then this is the image on the left is in Palmer. And so this really struck me because it is adjacent to the Swift River and it has a little bit more structure to it. There's actually sort of wood holding in the compacted gravel, but this is an ADA accessible trail that has a bench. Ideally, that would be an accessible bench, but in this image, it just really helps illustrate potentially what this trail could look like for people. And I'm kind of just trying to pair it with that section of the site plan, which shows the proximity to the Center Brook with a bench in the viewing area. And then my last image here, just for now, is this trail is a sensory trail in Belchertown. And so this is a project that I had been aware of, and it received a lot of state funding, both for design and for construction. There are some wood bridges in this trail, which I don't see getting factored into the trail in Upton, but this lookout is simple and it's adjacent to a resource area, and it was permitted, under Massachusetts Wetland Protection Act. And I think it just provided a good example to show that this trail could be implemented without going to such a high level that it becomes cost prohibitive. This trail, the highlight of this trail is that the sensory allows someone who is visually impaired to use the strings to follow the path of the trail. And then there are informational kiosks all throughout the trail. And so that's kind of extra bells and whistles, but it does kind of start to lead someone down the road to understand what this path could look like if it were implemented. So with that, that's what I have for tonight, and I'm happy to have any discussion or hear comments from the committee, and then just that approach to select board, kind of as an introduction of what BSC has been working on.
Yeah, Jeff, I had a question regarding the parking, the slide that you showed for the parking behind the arcade block. So that was assuming that the town purchased like that arcade slice of land, I think. Right.
I think that's a good question. I think it could be a bunch of different scenarios that could allow that. That could be if the Thompson block or the arcade block stayed in private ownership, and someone wanted to pursue that. I think it could be built off of the town parking lot, or if there was an easement or something that the town could acquire for that. Or yeah, I think it could be either or scenario.
Okay, I was wondering, like, if it was including the thought that we had purchased the Thompson block, if we own that whole slice of land coming out there, I wonder, would there be more parking that we could utilize, or would we not utilize it because of the wetlands there?
So I just want to jump in real quick. The impetus for the thought of showing that was more along the lines of showing that we're not showing that we're being considerate of the Thompson block, were the town not to gain control of it, or would they, would there be a scenario where the Thompson block is not wrapped into a future RFP for the future development, right? It's just a matter of showing that we're being considerate towards them, that we can envision assisting them in some way to provide additional parking.
Oh, assisting the arcade building for their own parking.
Yeah. Or showing that we're
okay.
not preventing it. It's more showing that we're not preventing it.
But,
Okay.
and I think additionally, the value of the exercise is also to show basically what the developable area is. I mean, it will help the Thompson block, as the Thompson owners as well. You have the resource areas that are being defined in this process. Those resource areas will, allow the Thompson block and the town, look at what the potential is for future development. So we're not, the Thompsons could say, we can build on all of this, and we have all the area we need to, to get a higher value use. The reality of the work that's being done will define what that potential looks like, in terms of, you really don't have that much parking. You really don't have that much space to expand. It's a valuable asset to the downtown community, but it has limitations. It's the same limitations that Holy Angels faces. It's the same limitations that the parking lot has. I think it gives us a good framework to have really productive discussions with the owners of the Thompson block.
Sure. Okay.
I think one of the things I wanted to ask Jeff, it looked like no matter what the scenario was, the maximum parking that we really realistically could achieve in recognizing the resource areas was 36. Was it 36 spaces was the maximum? And I think that was illustrated in A, in Vision A.
Yes. Yep, that's correct. That's kind of that's the full build out, plus or minus, because I think if someone really got into this, with design engineering of the full site. But yeah, I think that's a reasonable number to consider.
Okay, so
unless it was all parking, which I think I heard, like, just going for parking wasn't super desirable, and we didn't run that. We didn't run that scenario.
But even when you did the last scenario, which was showing everything being parking, we still didn't exceed 36 spaces.
Correct. Actually, so there is a let me share my screen one more time.
It was C, I think.
Yeah, I was just going to pull up C, correct.
Yeah, okay.
C gets you up to, if you look at C, it's broken down a little bit, because I think in total there's 39 spaces here, but I think we are trying to show that some of it would be municipal. So like that 31 block, it is a little bit different than the 8, because the 8 would probably serve the mixed use building. Shared parking is obviously an option even within this development proposal, but yeah, 31 seems to be the max for that lower area when you stretch it and get closer to the resource area.
Yeah. So, but even under this scenario, we only get 39.
Correct.
39 spaces. Okay.
Yep. One more thing I would like to mention is when we were looking at, I'm going to put the screen up one more time, and I know we want it to be brief, so I did just want to mention in the permitting analysis, one thing that we are fleshing out is if you look at this image and see the blue line that kind of runs right through the parking lot. So it's demarked as a FEMA floodplain, and what we're starting to see is that the FEMA line doesn't seem accurate, and I think that's pretty common actually in certain areas. We're trying to ascertain some existing survey data to show that the actual height of the the whole area there is actually higher than what's marked as floodplain. And so we think that that's a totally viable situation. It would require us to be having like a potential action item in the report. There's a process to go back to FEMA with a survey and information and say, based on our survey data, like this line is inaccurate or it's not in the right location. It's called a letter of map revision. And we think that what we see is for future developers the town going through that process to kind of dispute the FEMA line there might be really important to clarify where that FEMA line is. Our civil engineering team kind of thinks that you could pretty much remove the FEMA line from most of that area, and there's no problem with that. It's just a process, but it would provide a level of predictability that might not exist today. Because if the FEMA line stays, there would be some restrictions in there, and it could be problematic. So that is something that we're looking at through the permitting analysis, and I don't have a total conclusion, but we are seeing that line kind of skirts down and does run along the center brook more than bulge out like that. And so it's information that we're piecing together now, but I did want to mention it just for the committee because it will come up probably in the permitting analysis whenever that's completed.
So are you saying that FEMA line would be just basically at the edge of the bioswale in the parking lot, or still further to the river?
We don't know yet, because I think the lower right corner of that is low. It's at the lowest point, but what the survey data seems to show is that lowest point is still higher than the flood zone. So it's kind of a work in progress, but I did want to mention it because we did have a period of time where we were really questioning the viability of the concept based on the FEMA, but the Grove Street Bridge project exists, and there's some survey data that goes over onto this parcel. So we're looking at that. We're requesting a copy of that so that we can show that, and it might be an action item for the town, especially for the private developer. The civil team doesn't think that just expanding the town parking lot it's as important, because if you're just doing this one project as expanding the parking lot, you can usually cover that kind of discussion through a notice of intent with the Conservation Commission. But the predictability for a developer would be to formalize kind of that FEMA line, and that would be a step that the town might take to help.
But the parking is grandfathered. It's pre-existing, right? There's no scenario that we could envision from a regulatory perspective that would disallow the use of the parking lot, even though it's in the floodplain.
Yeah, I think there will still be a permitting process for the parking, but I think what we've talked about last time is the amount of area that's already disturbed out there helps the town show that you could improve it. The FEMA line is more about whether or not there's fill added and whether there's compensatory storage on the same property. And so that's the kind of, it's very detailed, but I did want to mention it because going back and forth for a little while last week and this week, but everyone's indicating that based on the actual, first we did LiDAR, which is the aerial photography topography, and then we're looking at that survey and it shows that everything's higher than the FEMA information suggests. So in some ways that's really good. It's a good scenario. We would just want to be recommending that the town formalize that.
Okay.
Jeff, are you not allowed to build a parking lot in a floodplain?
You are allowed.
Okay.
The way the floodplain regulations work is that if you're adding fill to build something, then you have to have that equal amount of space somewhere else where you're actually taking away area to provide the storage, the flood storage. So it is allowed, and it's just a matter of kind of crunching these numbers on where that FEMA line might actually be.
Okay.
Great.
Well, given what you've produced, I'd like to, canvass everybody and see what their thoughts are and what design. Let's just start with which design is the most appealing, and then go, ask specific questions as we go along. First of all, does anybody else have any questions for Jeff before we go into the, caucusing in terms of what design was most attractive?
No.
Okay. Well, I'll start. It seems to me for this, just looking at the net result in parking, because I think from a business perspective, parking is critical, and we're trying to encourage parking to be complementary to a business use, whether it's the brewery or anything that's built in the future. One of, I think, the really valuable pieces of information out of all of this work is that there's way fewer parking spaces than I would have imagined was possible, and far fewer than I think are actually being currently used. I think Russ did pointed out at our last meeting that he had seen at least, and I think he's probably right, somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 cars using that parking lot on a busy night. That doesn't change the fact that whatever we do has to be in kind of a regulatory compliant manner. And if we have the difference between 36 and 39 spaces, that seems immaterial to me. Try and maximize to get to 39 for the sake of an ugly parking lot that uses every imaginable space doesn't seem to be worth it. So from my perspective, scenario A, which had the parklets, some a rain garden or a stormwater treatment system incorporated into it, highlighted the riverbank, and allowed for the development of a future building, that seemed pretty attractive to me, as well as the fact that there was an allowance for let's call it a patio or a common space behind the church. I think that's also attractive. It's something we talked about kind of vaguely in the past, but is, allows a better use or a better social use of that area. I think the other value that I see is, as I said, I think this gives us a place to have a substantive discussion with the people that own the Thompson building, even to the extent of they giving them improved parking space in the goal of furtherance of an aesthetic outcome for downtown and a business outcome for them, so that there's potentially some sort of ability to negotiate something that gives both parties what they want out of it, and rather than stalling any future development down there. So as I said, from my perspective, I think the conceptual design, the first design, is the one that I would prefer. In going around the table, Craig, do you have any preferences?
I had come late. For some reason, I was thinking that we had to go in person, so I went down to the town hall. But I did. So I missed the first one, the first one that you had mentioned. So I might have missed the other ones too. So I probably can't comment.
Okay. Jeff, do you mind pulling up the design scenario A, and we'll continue around. Julie, why don't you give us your thoughts?
I like A and C. Is the thought that we're only presenting one? You're gonna present multiple ideas still, right? They're just kind of, the details are a little bit clearer maybe, or the resolution of the images is a little bit higher. Is that my understanding right, Jeff?
Yeah, and I would defer to Michael, but yes, I think part of our entire project will have all four all four concepts. I do think that there was always a goal to try to find a preferred option, Michael, because I think we, in terms of our permitting analysis, permitting analysis might be similar for the other ones, but I think it'll be specific for one. And then if we're doing a preliminary order of magnitude cost, it was going to be for one scenario. And Michael, I don't know if you want to speak to that in more detail, but
that's exactly what I was thinking.
Okay. I like this A, and I like C if you want to flash to C, just so Craig can know that bearing. But where that one, I feel like there's less it seems more achievable. But again, it fully relies on cooperation from the owners of the arcade block. But yeah, I'm for either one. So I guess if we go around and see where everyone is, you could really sway me either way, truthfully.
Well, I don't think, one of the things I would point out is I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think that, from my perspective, there's in C, there's the opportunity to still do a building at the front and not have a significant net loss in parking.
That's a very good point.
Okay. Pierre, what are your thoughts?
I like the concept of C and A also, because it looks a little less cluttered along Grove Street at the back end of it. I also see the merit in having the second building there. But I'm really torn with being able to make any sort of a judgment without understanding the financial feasibility of retaining Holy Angels versus needing to remove it, because it's just too costly to try and rehab it. So I think until that gets decided, for me personally, I think it's up in the air, because if you're putting a big 5,500 square foot building up at the top where Holy Angels and building one concept is, not 5,500, I think it exceeded that, excuse me, 9,200 square foot building up there. And put some decorative historical elements to the facade so it retains the look and feel that we're going for, but for less money, you're getting more bang for your buck. So I think without really understanding what the number is for Holy Angels, it sort of leaves me in a quandary as to which one is the best solution. But
yeah.
Well, as I said, I think in the last meeting, Holy Angels it's an impediment to making decisions, as you're pointing out. So and beyond our control at this point. Russ, could you weigh in on your thoughts, please?
Well, I mean, I guess back to the thought, I prefer B, because I guess I'm not as attached to Holy Angels as most people are, just from the standpoint of developing the area and making it look right, and trying to build that smaller building on Grove Street. I think it's going to be difficult just from a financial standpoint to get a developer to build a building that small, with that small footprint. So the larger building probably be easier to get built. So and the more parking, the better. I don't think we can necessarily bow to the brewery, since who knows if it's even going to be there by the time this is built. So it seems like to take that into a lot of consideration doesn't really make sense. I mean, those buildings themselves, it's for sale. I mean, he's trying to keep, I think, a 5-year lease there. It's my understanding.
Yeah.
Once they sell it. So who knows if that's even going to be there by the time this gets built or gets developed. And hopefully someone tears that down and builds something with parking.
Yeah, seriously.
So, I mean, my preference is to have more parking down there. If we want to attract people down there, we need to have a way for them to be there.
So now we've had like a vote for each one.
Well, but as going back to the original point, which is we have, even with the biggest building, we only have 39 parking spaces. In the maximum configuration, taking into account the constraints, regulatory constraints, we have 39 spaces. Okay, maximum in Jeff's estimation. So just keep that in mind as we talk about the various different scenarios. Okay? And I do agree that with you, Russ. Look, we can't make any decisions and we shouldn't be making any decisions based on the brewery. The property doesn't own the parking lot. The town does. The town doesn't have any contractual obligation to supply the brewery with parking. It's a good, it's brought a lot of activity downtown, so it's great to have it there, but there's no guarantee it's going to stay there. Lori, I know you're a little under the weather. Do you want to contribute tonight, or do we want to hang back?
I really hope, I guess I have to say I like A the best, and I like the old architecture. I like the New England feel of the town. So I think that's a big part of my feeling that way. I feel like if we do C, it's going to just look like a whole swath of parking lots, which is what we have now. But that may be what we need. I understand that. And if we were to take down the church, we would have to be building things that make people want to come, because if we don't have an art center or things to come to, people don't need to come. So I'm trying to remember that also, that we're trying to create this parking so that people can come to the services that we offer, and we are trying to bring more offerings down there so we can bring the critical mass down there, and then we need the parking.
I know it's hard to reach consensus in all of these situations because each of the designs has merits. What I think we would want as a desirable outcome, though, is to be able to go to the selectmen with some fairly well-reasoned explanation of why we prefer certain things. I would go back and just kind of look at it logically. We don't control the Thompson building. We don't control the Thompson block. And in a lot of ways, we as the Economic Development Committee don't control what's going to happen with Holy Angels. Town meeting will shake out a lot of what the intent is on Holy Angels. And my preference in the is to do something rather than nothing, and to come up with recommendations, not to wait on or use buildings that we don't control the destiny of as the rationale for our decision making. Otherwise, it just becomes a wish list. So my fallback position is, what do we control? And that's the parking lot that we currently have, plus the municipal parking. That's what's driving me mostly towards A or C. B, requires the Thompson, the Thompson building, the arcade building be removed and a new building be placed there. I agree with Russ, it's probably more economically feasible. I just don't think it's within our control. So from my perspective, what I would like to see is something happen that improves that area and makes it more attractive for visitors and more useful for the town. I mean, it's uncomfortable for me to conclude that our status quo is acceptable just because it gives us parking, right? My imperative is to try and improve the look and feel of downtown. That doesn't do it. Yeah. So that's why I fall on A or C. And if the town decides they want to preserve Holy Angels, then C still works. If they don't want to preserve Holy Angels, A still works and C still works. Yeah. So that's that's the basis for my rationale.
That's where my head was at too. Why, like, whichever way it goes, you have a plan they can do.
One of the elephants in the room, I think, might be what the select board, if the select board will probably come to us and ask, if we're going to put a building on Grove Street, what's the purpose of it? Who's going to use it? So we might have to answer that question, or keep it in the back of our minds as the select board might ask us about that.
Mm-hmm. But we wouldn't do it. It would be a developer.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So
Jeff did talk through some ideas early on about what could be there. But Russ has a good point that it might be a tough sell for a developer if it's not a lot of square footage.
Well, how many square feet was that building?
So for 4,500 for a footprint, and that's two stories. So you're talking about a 9,000 square foot building. It's, I mean, as based on just square footage, it would be three commercial spaces and 4 or 5 apartments. So it's not insignificant. Yeah, and it's not as small as some buildings. I mean, I did. There was a discussion that about shrinking it, and I'm careful to not shrink it too much. But 4,500 square feet is a I would say it's like a mid-size mixed-use building that could be viable. That's what we want to make sure we're trying to show stuff that generally speaking would be viable. I wanted to offer one thing with the select board. I've been tuning into some of their discussions, and I think that there is some level of an impossible task coming out of this conceptual design phase, which is that there are a series of unknowns, about the church building and about who controls the Thompson block. So I do think I agree with what Julie said, is that there's kind of this series of options based on if certain things were to happen or not happen. And so I think that's part of something that's going to, I think, be a little bit challenging for the select board to understand. But I also think on the flip side of that, they may be really quick to figure that out and be like, well, we don't know the fate of the church, and we don't control the Thompson block. So there could be some scenarios that play out over the next couple of years. And I think what I would like to say at the select board meeting is that this report will give a great reference point for people to go back to and say, this is what we were anticipating. And if this scenario played out, we could expand the municipal parking lot. In my mind, there's a real significant, discussion with the Thompson block. So I think option D, which shows the expanded town parking lot, could be a scenario that would complement the church becoming active. And it allows for the Thompson block to maybe not change significantly for a period of time, but it allows the church to be activated and allows the town to add some parking to support that. So I think in every one of the scenarios, there's definitely a discussion piece. I think the key with the select board is to let them know that this is kind of conceptual, get their input, and then we can take the month of May to finish off the report and kind of put narrative to, some narrative to how these options might pan out or not pan out. And I didn't run that by Michael, but I think that there are, a little discussion about each of the scenarios that might help complement kind of how people see this.
If I could add one thing,
Yeah.
If I may, I have my hand up. I don't know if you saw.
Okay, go ahead.
I keep coming back to all the votes that we've taken in support of keeping the building, and so I feel responsibility in some ways. We bought it, we fixed the steeple, we've voted to paint it and paint the fencing. We voted for the downtown revision. We voted, I think, 4 or 5 votes for now. And now another vote's coming at town meeting, which is really just a month away, to update that and get a bit of a cost analysis of what it will cost to bring it up to occupancy. So I think, like you're saying, Jeff, in a little bit over a month or not long after that, we'll have a better sense of what we're working with. And maybe if we can use this as our background, we've discussed all these things, and then we have a little bit more information, a little bit more input from the town, and a little bit better sense of what the dollars and cents will be and how willing people are to do it. That if we could get that time, I think that would be helpful. So we can make our recommendations, we can say our choices, but we could also maybe say, hold on to that. I don't know if that's a possibility. I'm just throwing that out.
Well, I would say, yeah, that makes perfect logical sense. But unfortunately, this project and where we are is on a timeline. We have to wrap it up before June.
Okay.
So, and that's because of the grant funding. So,
well,
that's
I would just add
our limitation.
I would just add to Michael too, because I think if you're securing the funding to take that exploratory step with the building, it's going to take time to actually produce and come up with that. So it won't be like town meeting would issue the funding and then the report's done. It's going to be, I don't know how many months it's scoped out to take, but it's definitely going to take a little while to explore that building and come up with it.
I'd be surprised if we don't have it until like November.
Right.
So, I think we've talked before, this vote that's coming up at town meeting, it's not the 90,000, it's 9,000, I guess, which isn't really going to give us it may give us a sense of the need of the community, but I'm not sure $9,000 is significant enough to get a consensus out of the community about go, no go, which is, I think, a little unfortunate, as we're going to be stuck again in this situation where we don't know what we can do. Again, not to beat a dead horse, I would really like to see us be able to have some momentum, some, improvement of the downtown. It's not unfair for people to say, what do you do with your time? You've been studying this forever. You have a downtown visioning that's not being acted on. Not that I necessarily feel like we have to do something. I just feel it's desirable to make an improvement. And the design concepts that Jeff has put forward, all of them are an improvement. Right?
Yeah, and
Every single one.
Gene, one thing that you said, because I think in terms of going to the select board, one thing about concept A is that through this process to kind of come up with that concept, along with the permitting analysis, we're trying to provide clarity for a developer to potentially make this more appealing, to actually to come in and do it so that the town is not on the hook for the entire project. And I think that's something that the select board would probably be interested in, knowing that concept A is the one that could be viable to go out for RFP again, because the first two were not successful, and this might provide the clarity that a developer would want to have in order to kind of investigate the property a little bit more. So there is some merit in A, which is that it kind of falls in that RFP realm, which the select board has released twice. So there is an element of that, which I think is a positive, and it allows the church conversation to evolve and play out.
Okay.
Russ?
So are more or less, are we really kind of just deciding whether or not we want to put a building in the parking lot or not? Because we don't really control the Thompson block. We don't control Holy Angels. So our recommendation is whether to put a building or just a parking lot.
To me, it's, the recommendation is to provide the highest and best outcome from an economic value and aesthetic value for the selectmen, based upon our spending a lot of time thinking about this. And the no alternative doesn't seem like an alternative to me. It doesn't seem like we're presenting anything of any value other than status quo. So whether, the building gets built, in an RFP or not, we still get a good aesthetically pleasing parking lot design out of it. If the building doesn't get built, we have a few additional spaces or added green space, in the form of the rain garden or the bioswale that Jeff had put forward, which could easily be incorporated into that area of design A. So, honestly, a 9,000 square foot building isn't that insignificant. And, let's say it's a Starbucks, for sake of argument, right? A Starbucks would easily fit in that 4,000 square foot downstairs. I think their ideal configuration is 2,500 square feet or something like that. With, the parking is somewhat constrained though. But I have, I've had some conversation with some developers that have Starbucks for a client. They are looking for something in the area that would fit their ideal, footprint. So I don't think, saying a 4,500 square foot or 9,000 square foot new construction building is out of the realm of somebody's interest. And we'd still have an attractive parking lot. What's that?
Would that hurt existing building companies like the Little Coffee Bean if we had competition for them?
I don't know. But it's not our role to pick winners and losers. Whoever has the best business model is going to win.
Yeah.
Following up on what you had mentioned, Gene, where you said, if you want to remove the question marks and say, we can make a recommendation based on what we own and not the other elements, I think what Russ said makes the most sense, because now what you've done is you said, the Thompson block's an unknown, the church is unknown. So if we're going to do anything definitive, then maybe it's putting the smaller building on Grove Street is the right solution that we propose. And we leave those other unknowns to be, for all we know, the Thompsons may turn around and sell it to a developer who, after they decide that they like the smaller building on Grove Street and say, we want to expand, and, you still have this scenario that you have the smaller building adjacent to Holy Angels, but, it's not for us to make that recommendation because, again, it's out of our control.
And that's the only place I think we can be comfortable, is to say, what do we control?
Yeah. Which is why I keep kind of going back to C in my gut, because you're still waiting for a developer to come along and to build that building on Grove Street. Where if you want to see progress, like see something happen, we can make that one happen. It seems like a lot easier. And you can still retrofit a building there. Like you're saying, like it doesn't exclude that possibility later.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think we want to wrap up the discussion. Everybody's had a chance to weigh in, I believe. Based on the discussion, though, I don't think we have a clear consensus. It's either A or C. It doesn't seem like, because if we look at the ones that we don't control, D is out of the question, right? D is the one that isn't. That's the big building that's along.
That's B. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, that's the two buildings being removed and that being a new construction. So again, I don't think we're at the point where we can say we have consensus to go to the select board. All we can do is, as Pierre just explained, or at least proposed, is look, all we can do is make recommendations on what we control.
Mm-hmm.
What was D again? Did we have control over D? Because I thought it was just the putting the small parking lot behind the arcade block. Was that all D was proposing?
D was only parking lots, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, and D, I'm gonna put D up real quick because I think that D actually probably represents the most town control. The thing that is a little bit problematic with D right now is it shows that parking lot behind the Thompson block. So, Michael, I'm curious about something which would be if we did like D1. If we did D and then we did a D1, because I think for us it's pretty easy. But what I'm a little bit uncomfortable with the D as it's presented right here is it shows the parking behind the Thompson block as if there's a lot that immediately raises a lot of questions.
Yeah.
But if we had this drawing where it was just expanding the town parking lot and it relates to potential activation of the church and it leaves Thompson block kind of just untouched. This D actually shows what the town actually has total control over. If we did D1 and then showed, that we don't preclude a future parking area here, it might be useful to show that, but I don't like D combined with that parking behind the Thompson block. I think it makes a lot of questions raise up. So Michael, I don't know if you're okay with that idea, because I think D has some merit.
We're talking about just showing an option of this, and you just delete out the you're just not showing those spaces right there.
Those
Correct.
9
Yeah.
spaces.
Yeah.
Totally.
Although Jeff, I thought the way that you described it made once I asked that question and the way you answered it, it made a lot of sense to me, because you were kind of saying that D, the way it stands now, would be amenable to the Thompson block, because then they would have additional parking. So it would be a conversation between the select board and the Thompson block if that's something that they wanted, which seems like it would be desirable for them. So,
Right.
So I think the question's easily explained. So I think that's a good idea. D and D1, yeah, we could propose both.
Yeah, except that I don't know. I just see that this is being, for me, and this is just speaking for me, it's aesthetically the least desirable outcome.
Mm-hmm.
Because it still allows the Thompson use of that as a storage area for storage containers, other types of things, where a negotiated parking agreement that allows the configuration of A or C gives them those 9 spaces, but gives the town an attractive downtown area. You know, so
Well, Gene, what do you find not attractive about this?
Because it does the green, what's showing is green space is actually being used for parking of equipment and storage containers. You look out of the back, if you go up into the library and look out of the library and look at the out towards the center of town, it wouldn't change that perspective much at all. All we'd have is a nice little greened up parking lot with fewer spaces than we currently have available for use. So I don't think it gets us anything.
I don't know if you'd see the parking lot from the back of the community center, though. I think you mainly see the back of the church from the community center, right?
No, you see the parking lot. Just go into the library and take a look. Yeah.
Okay.
The other thing about that is if you go down behind the church now and you look at that green space that's back there, that low space, that's what this looks like. And it seems like we wouldn't be making any use of it at all. And the other designs are so beautiful.
Yeah.
Can I suggest just kind of where we're at with the conversation? I mean, it really seems like it's between A and C, maybe mostly. I mean, D's been provided as it's not like an option in lieu of A, B, or C. D is more like D is going to be evaluated through a separate funding source to do engineering to figure out actually implementing that parking, possibly in the short term if nothing were to happen with the rest of the block, right? So D is sort of like a separate. It's not even necessarily an option as it relates to A, B, and C. So maybe. I mean, and Jeff, you're not going to have permitting completely identified and orders of magnitude and cost completely identified by April 15th, correct?
No, we wouldn't.
So, I mean, I think we just go to the select board with this conversation, not this exact conversation, but with the conversation of we've evaluated it, we've added things along the way, and it's really A or C depending on scenarios that present themselves, but depending on the future that we don't have insight into, right? I don't know. How does everybody feel about that?
That's kind of where I am. I do think that we don't, like I said, we don't have really consensus and we don't have control of certain things that we really need to. So I don't think there's much else we can present.
And that way we'll get select board's feedback and maybe and maybe hopefully a preference between one or the other, and then from that we give Jeff the go ahead to finalize the study and to provide the costing and the permitting breakdown for whether it be A, whether it be C.
Okay.
I just plopped in a photo of that view you were talking about, Gene, that I had on my phone. It's from the outside of the library, but the playground, you can just see if you zoom in, there's so much junk and clutter and stuff back there. Just I know we're wrapping up this conversation, but it's like, oh, I have an image.
Oh, here it
Did
comes.
you put that in the chat, Julie?
What? Yeah, I just did. It should show up.
Did you put the image in? Okay.
I'm gonna see kind of. And I have a video, but I'm not going to try to upload
Okay,
that.
so in any case, I think we want to wrap up the discussion. There's some time that we have between now and when this will be presented to the selectmen. Jeff has some work to do. We've got the value of the resource area delineation, which was one of the primary goals that we were trying to complete in all of this work. We've got some good, aesthetically pleasing design elements that we can present, but I think it's premature for us at this point to say we're ready to go for to the selectmen on the 15th. But I don't know, does anybody disagree? I mean, I'm perfectly happy to present what we've discussed on the 15th, but it just doesn't seem like we have a clear consensus.
Well, I feel like we have like an either or depending on what happens. So to me, that's not a bad thing to say that there's two ideas that we believe in depending on what happens next. You know, I don't know. I don't think that's a bad thing because it does feel like we want to keep this momentum going. If you feel like you have enough, if that's enough time for you, Jeff, to work out the remaining details.
I mean, I think there's kind of two prongs to this, which is potentially going to the select board on April 15th with this committee or whoever can come and just talk through the process really briefly and then show the concepts. And then I think say that right now the committee's leaning towards A or C based on circumstances that are not clear yet. And I think getting the select board's reaction, I think could be valuable, and hearing what they have for questions and discussion. Michael, especially if you're okay with that. I mean, because I think if we don't show any of the concepts to the select board in April, it pushes our project up against a wall where we would be going closer to finishing it and not have that interaction. It's not early. We're definitely at the middle of the tail end of the project, but I think getting the select board aware of the concepts even, I think there's a good opportunity because they've been talking at length about the church itself. And I think this complements kind of their struggle that they're having about the church. It shows the concepts about mixed use buildings and potential parking. And I think it gives them an opportunity to chime in a little bit, maybe before this committee anchors your preference.
Yeah, I'm prepared to present the discussion and prepared, to present all of the options and the two that we think are the most viable based upon what we control.
Yeah.
We'll just have to present it without a clear consensus. Just,
right.
As you said, for their input.
And my understanding, Michael and Jean, is that the select board wouldn't be asked to take an action. This is more information for them. I don't know if that's correct. That was my assumption, is that they're not taking a formal vote.
Yeah. Correct. They certainly don't have to take a formal vote on anything. I mean, this is all information that is to be presented to them. That's going to be the town's information to have going forward to inform us on how to proceed with any future development. So it's all just good information to have. There, I wouldn't want them to even really select something and say by vote this is now what's going to happen because the future is indefinite.
Okay. All right. Are we ready to close this discussion then?
Yeah.
Okay, good. One thing I'd like to add is, Michael, I don't know how valuable you think it would be for you and I maybe to meet with Joe and go through the design scenarios.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Okay.
I will reach out to Joe tomorrow and see if there's some time.
Yeah, I think his insight in terms, particularly from a planning perspective, would be helpful.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any objection to Michael and I doing that?
Not at all.
No.
Okay. All right, good. All right, then let's close the discussion. We wanted to kind of expedite the meeting tonight, just focus on what we have. None of the other businesses really changed to any great extent. I do think if there's anybody that would like to touch on something, now is the opportunity, but I would like to move towards closing the meeting with what we got accomplished tonight, which I think is fairly significant. And thanks, Jeff, for presenting and being patient with us with all the detail.
Nope, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. And so I'll be in touch with Michael, however you guys need me.
Okay,
Thanks,
great.
Thank you.
So as I said, there's a lot of other things that we typically have on our agenda. Nothing has changed on any of them. I don't think there's any real reason to go through them all at this juncture. One thing I do think we need to discuss, though, is moving from remote to in-person meetings. We all got notice, I think, about that.
Yeah.
I think it's all changed though at the state level, and we haven't got notification yet, but I think they're definitely extending it, and they may be extending it forever. I got something through my library media people that there's I don't think we're gonna have to go to in person.
We'll probably know on Monday, because that's when it expires. And I know Denise, the town clerk, was bringing something formally to the select board for them to act on to allow for remote participation. So something should become clear hopefully by Monday. Denise, like she did last time, I'm sure we'll send something out. If we have to meet in person, obviously I'll coordinate that for you guys.
Okay, great. All right. Does anybody have anything else they'd like to add for the meeting tonight?
No, nothing pressing.
Okay, great. In that case, let's move to close the meeting.
Do we want to pick our next date for a meeting?
I always forget to do that. Thanks, Julie. I'm so sorry. What's the last Thursday of the month, this coming month?
The 24th.
Does anybody have any problems with the 24th?
Nope.
Nope.
I already had it in my calendar for some reason. I think we must have talked about it.
Okay, then we'll set the meeting for the 24th at the usual time.
Okay.
Okay, now can I have a motion to close the meeting?
So moved.
Okay,
Motion to close the meeting.
all right. All right, thanks, everybody.